Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. For those of you that have watched my interviews in the past, Wayne will be a very familiar face for you, but I'm excited to have him here to team up with an interview focused on conversational AI. But before I dive into the questions that I've got for you, Wayne, can you give everybody an introduction?
Of course. Hi, everybody. For those who don't know me or my background, I'm Wayne Butterfield. I lead our intelligent automation solutions practice at G, and I'm a 20-year veteran of contact center, 12-year veteran of RPA, and first deployed conversational AI in about 2014. So great to be here. Obviously, always great to talk to Emma and your audience. So thank you.
Yeah, so let's get started for anybody that isn't familiar with the idea of conversational AI with kind of that basic definition of what is it in your mind.
Okay, interesting one. And for anyone who hasn't seen, I do a question of the day, and there's been a couple of questions on this. What's the difference between a chatbot and conversational AI? But for me, conversational AI is the use of technology to replicate a human. More often than not, historically, we've seen this in the form of a chatbot, where we would have a two-way dialogue, one being human, the other being a technology, with the aim, ordinary as a purpose, and that purpose would be to resolve a query or a question. And that, in its simplest sense, is what conversational AI is doing. It's replicating the ability to communicate with people using a technology.
So let's use insurance as an example, because most of us have insurance policies if they're not living and breathing in the insurance space like I am. But what are some examples of how you have seen conversational AI used in insurance and used really successfully?
Okay, so I guess there's a couple of examples that I can think of off the top of my head. Let's start with probably the simplest, which is what we just started discussing there, the ability to have a query resolved. I ordinarily think about insurance with kind of four key areas. And I think about this as a consumer. Buying or renewing a policy generally is one reason why I make contact with an insurer. Making a change to say, I did an extra bedroom due to this, I've done something else. It's a change that I've made with my lifestyle that might affect my premium. I need to make a claim is another one. And then possibly I need to cancel. Like they're the four reasons ordinarily why I would ever, whether it's healthcare, motor, whatever, it's the reason why I would make contact. There is a good opportunity for conversational AI to fit in all of those four areas. So I guess that's probably the area where I would start thinking about conversational AI in insurance. It's generally going to be to deal with at least a proportion of those type of queries. It's probably going to be strongest end to end in that second one, which is updating change. So I've added an extra bedroom, I've changed my car, all of these things, very transactional. More often than not, they're kind of one and done type queries. It's used successfully to at least initiate claims. Now, it may get quite complex. There may be some nuance around it that might need a person to step into that. But certainly conversational AI has been strong there. It can help with that last bucket, which obviously is very much around either sales or retention or canceling. Again, depending on the contact strategy of the organization, they may want a person involved in those conversations for upsell, for retention purposes. But they're the four buckets that I see at least a consumer potentially interacting with conversational AI. Now, I kept this pretty basic around the use of conversational AI in a chatbot type environment. But when I truly think about the wider role that conversational AI can play in insurance, I think there's a couple of extra examples. So the first one is, how can you use conversational AI not to interact, but to listen? And how can you do that in both the contacts that are being made? So whether it be on the phone, whether it be via some kind of text-based channel, how can you use conversational AI to understand the customer's intent? How can you understand their sentiment, etc.? And how can you do something as a result of that new knowledge that you have to assist the agent? So again, conversational AI doesn't always have to be responding. It can be still thinking and understanding. And then that response might be to an agent, not necessarily to a consumer. So again, another interesting user case. And then, although not necessarily the same, a similar user case that will use some form of sentiment, emotion detection, etc., that you could link to conversational AI is around checking to see the validity of someone's story. I was involved in a car accident and am I coming, Aaron, do I sound nervous? I really had an accident. Am I lying? So again, although not a common user case for conversational AI can play a role in that, in understanding the type of language that's being used. And those three areas, I think, are where conversational AI is positively having an effect in insurance. And then the last one, if I think about areas like underwriting, risk, etc., using a conversational AI as an internal assistant to ask questions, almost like an Alexa for business, asking specific questions based on a scenario as a back office worker to say, okay, can you get me some information on this? Can you help with that? What would happen to a premium if X? All of these are the types of questions where potentially there is an opportunity to use conversational AI to provide answers back and to support an advisor, even in a back office role that is not linked to a front end consumer conversations. Loads of different ways in insurance, some of them more prevalent than others, but certainly it is a transformational technology when you use it across all those different areas.
That last example of using it to replicate how we've all become so familiar with talking to our at-home devices for answers. My 6-year-old already talks smack to our devices in the house to get them to tell her jokes and interact with. That idea, I think, is going to be something that 5 years from now, we're going to be seeing a lot more and a lot more prevalent. But it's oftentimes because of that kind of connection to the chatbot side of things, not the conversation that we're having. We start talking about conversational AI. So I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Absolutely.
So we just talked about maybe where it's a good fit and where we've seen success with conversational AI being deployed and use cases for that. What's the other side of that equation? Where have you seen challenges arise, or maybe use cases that people have tried to kind of fit the square peg into the round hole when it comes to conversational AI?
And I think what we need to think about when we think about any contact channel, contact type, contact technology, is that not every query is created equal. And certainly where I think the recent hurricane in Florida would be a perfect example of where conversational AI can be both a help, because there is going to be a lot of pent-up demand. People have got queries, questions, and they're probably going to want to speak to somebody. And so conversational AI can play a role there, but there's going to be a lot of emotion. There's going to be a lot of people who are incredibly upset. And so if you've not created a great experience that's frictionless and also understands the emotional state of your client base in a time where they're probably all over the place, right? How horrible will it be if you are not creating the right experience for somebody who is at that point the most emotionally charged that they may well ever be? They potentially lost anything and everything. And so to keep them in a frustrating loop using conversational AI, I would almost guarantee that customer will leave you and they will never entertain your brand again, because you can create wow moments even in someone's darkest days, probably not going to be purely enabled by conversational AI. So again, these emotional states and the examples I've seen around canceling policies might be generally a great user case if you've tried other means of retention, or actually you're not bothered about retention because you know that this is not somebody that you want to retain, but they might be canceling as a result of a bereavement. And so in that scenario, you might not want a very unpersonable bot. You might actually want to have a bit of human interaction. And so there are even small micro scenarios in just about every single query. As I say, not all queries are created equal, and not all query types and variations of queries are created equal. And so there's always a right place for conversational AI, but there's also a very wrong place for conversational AI, even in areas where you believe there is a high for chatbots and this technology to make good use. So that, for me, really, it comes down to very nuanced specifics. And then the last one is the most important. When it's not transactional, when there is so much variation, so much nuance, the conversation could go in so many different directions, not just emotionally charged, but just complex and really difficult to solve, then again, you're likely to cause more frustration than help. And so it's those areas that are less transactional, that the resolution is less defined, that you will really struggle with conversational AI.
I think I just made a post yesterday about the idea of how customers don't want fully 100% digital interactions with your company all the time. They want options. And that goes to exactly what you're saying. If I'm canceling my policy for one reason, I might be good with doing that completely remotely. And I might actually want to do it remotely so I
Yeah.
don't feel pressure to be retained
Mhm.
or stay on. But on the flip side, to your point, there might be circumstances where that's a really inappropriate use case. And I, as the human, want to be able to opt out of that technology driven experience and just talk to
Mhm.
another human. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a really important part as we're looking at how these solutions are taking shape, that we're keeping that thought process of options in mind for our
Yeah.
customers.
Like,
Thank you so much for joining me, Wayne. It's always a pleasure. If you're not already, make sure you make your way over to follow him and join in the conversations. You mentioned those questions that you're doing on a regular basis. I think we still got a couple weeks going of those. So come join us in that conversation and follow him for all sorts of other insights in the intelligent automation space. But thank you so much for joining me and have a wonderful day, everyone.
thank you for having me, Emma, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Leading Change. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and come back weekly for more expert interviews on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.